By Professor Shilpa Khatri Babbar. Today's lecture is titled as Enlightenment Part 2 because in Part 1, which was our previous lecture, we had basically focused on the transition from Dark Ages to Enlightenment. So we were covering an era of 1600s to 1700s. And in addition to that, we were trying to understand the thought processes, the philosophies which had fueled democratic revolutions across the globe. And we touched upon five philosophers. The first one was Thomas Hobbes, the second was John Locke, the third was Montesquieu, and the fourth one was Rousseau, in addition to the fifth, that's Voltaire. And we had put a full stop to our part one of the discussion with a promise that I would come back with a part two to study Mary Wollstonecraft and her ideas about what enlightenment actually meant. And to discuss her ideas, I had also shared with you that I specifically want an exclusive lecture on this because I would want to see Mary Wollstonecraft's philosophy in combination with that of Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine. And the article, which is right there in front of you on your screens, is a beautiful write up by Lindsay Cole, which is on defining the natural rights of man. And it is basically an analysis of Edmund Burke, Thomas Paine, and Wollstonecraft. And as I scroll down this particular article, you will find that this article has basically tried to capture the thought processes of all the three philosophers who had experienced the French Revolution, which took place in the late 18th century. And their writing is a response to the violence in the political upheaval that was a result of this 18th century French Revolution. And all the three writers, in fact, they have recognized the inadequacies within the political systems of Britain and America as they concerned the natural rights of man. And the texts that have been the area of focus here is Edmund Burke's text published 1790, titled Reflections on the Revolution in France, and Thomas Paine's work, which was published a year later as a response to that of Burke's work. And Thomas Paine's work was titled Rights of Man. And Wollstonecraft's two texts are going to be our point of reference. One titled A Vindication of the Rights of Men, which is actually a direct response to Edmund Burke's work, Reflections on the Revolution in France, and was published in 1790 itself, the same year when Edmund Burke had actually penned his work, Reflections on the Revolution in France. And the other work, which we are going to also partially discuss, is Wollstonecraft's a 2 year later text, which is titled A Vindication of the Rights of Women. So I have highlighted whatever I have been focusing on as and when we move a little forward. And now we move on to the second page. And if you can see, we begin with Edmund Burke. And when I say we, I am primarily reading out Cole's ideology because she is very, very well and in a very crisp manner. She has analyzed all three of them. So now Burke has viewed revolution as a kind of obligation. Obligation for what? Obligation to repair the grievances which are present in the society. So revolution, he says, is normal because that's the only way you can repair the grievances in the society. And he pens this down in Reflections on Revolution in France in the year 1790. But his basic problem is with the violence and the anarchy. which was a consequence of the French Revolution. And it was not just problematic for him, it was rather very, very disturbing for him. And this is revealed throughout his write up. So I'm taking you a little down. So he says he in his write up seems to be very supportive of traditions, you know. So he says that what should have actually been done to repair the arrangement in France was that we moderately amend the traditional practices. So somewhere, as I just stated, that he was supportive of tradition, so he was just asking for or felt that there was a need for a moderate amendment of traditional practices. And he felt that the people were placing all of their confidence in untested and unproven theory. And when he's talking about people, he's talking about the revolutionaries. He said the revolutionaries were coming up with new sets of policies, with new sets of ideas. And in our lecture on French Revolution, we have seen, you know, the transitions from National Assembly to Legislative Assembly to National Council, the convention, the n number of political clubs that were influencing the thought processes as to how the government should be. So he felt that these untested and unproven theories made French Revolution very chaotic and unpredictable. And in the French Revolution, the revolutionaries were primarily only concerned with individual liberties. And he said that that's not the right objective. The objective should have been to respect or maybe even to adhere the customs or maybe to modify the customs a little bit, but for sure he was absolutely opposed to the brutality as well as to the disruptive nature of the French Revolution. And somewhere or the other, in Cole's work, we can read, and of course from Burke's work also, we get this impression that Burke has been very holding very sentimental views with regard to monarchy. And the kind of reaction which he has put across to the revolution is very severe. It's very grave, and it is as if he himself has been cheated, or he himself has been hit by this kind of a disturbance. And if you could see it in the italics, and I would want you to pay attention on this particular line, which has been highlighted, the line in italics. Men have a right to the acquisitions of their parents. So the first point is what is happening in the flow, that he's supportive of traditions. So when he's supportive of traditions, he feels that equality, fair enough, but equality should not be in things. Equality should be in rights. And hereditary is what the acquisition should be. Traditions should be respected. Conservative customs should be respected, with, of course, slight modification. But since our focus is not Edmund Burke, if you remember, our focus is Mary Wollstonecraft. And here comes in the problematic line. He states men have a right to the acquisition of their parents. That means at the outset, he has eliminated the existence of women. And mind you, we're talking about, and we shall come back to this idea also when we do Mary Wollstonecraft. So we are talking about traditions. And in the traditions there, then, it was all about primogeniture. So primogeniture is talking about transfer or inheritance and succession from one male to the other, from one male to the eldest male. Okay, so women were nowhere given that position or that control over property or any form of other right. And so this is a very important line for you to remember, because we are going to debate this post we discuss Burke and Thomas Paine. That's when we are going to move on to Mary Wollstonecraft. So coming back to Edmund Burke, he was actually horrified by this idea that you can loot, you can plunder, you can have or exercise coercive control. So this idea of seizure, this idea of coercive power was very, very disturbing for him. And he somehow reveals a kind of a sympathy for those who were compulsively or threateningly deprived of rank and fortune during the progression of the revolution. So I repeat that he said that equality in rights is fair enough, but surely his ideas do not demonstrate equality in things. So he emphasizes that, and I take you a little down, that the titles of nobility, the various religious distinctions, in fact, even a preservation of Christianity, it offers a lot of stability. And he said, just as in the British society, it has offered stability. So maybe if we would have continued with those titles and with religious distinctions, that is, maybe if we would have continued with maintaining the second estate and the first estate as it were in France, that is, the second estate being that of the nobility and the first being that of the clergy, then possibly there would have been some stability in the French society. And so he felt that, and or he felt threatened that maybe these ideas of French Revolution would pave their way into England and would disturb the stability of the English society also, because the Enlightenment was spreading very fast across the entire Europe. So Burke is somewhere of the feeling that when you adhere to or when you hold on to historical precedents, then it seems to be the safest way to ensure preservation of culture. So that cultural preservation or the preservation of traditions is surely very safe way. And he was of the opinion that government was a very basic and natural progression, from traditions and institutions which were actually not to be manipulated. So, improvement was welcomed. It's not that Burke did not welcome improvement. He said improvement was welcomed till the time the improvement does not disrupt the traditions, because the traditions are the natural order of things. So the state of nature is a state which is very traditional in nature, which is very conservative, which has certain basic defined rights and responsibilities. And so he consistently throughout his work, he has been seeking to uphold these timeless values and structures of the government, to ensure this sense of balance and cohesion in the society. However, he says that what is defined as natural rights, at least for me, has to be determined by estate and inheritance. So everybody cannot demand natural rights because it comes to you hereditarily. It is as if you inherit it. It is as if you succeed it. You cannot be a claimant to that. But when we do the second scholar, that is Thomas Paine. Thomas Paine is not in favor of this kind of a monarchical and a privileged kind of a structure. And in his work on Rights of Man, published in 1791, Paine's work actually is an antithesis, total antithesis to Burke's doctrine. Now, what's antithesis? So, that when you have a proposal, it happens to be a thesis, and when you have anything which is standing in opposition to that proposal, we refer to it as an antithesis. And thesis and antithesis, they collide and they form a synthesis. So, keeping Lindsay Cole's argument or analysis in mind, we would treat, hypothetically again, we would like to treat Edmund Burke as the thesis, Thomas Paine as the antithesis, and maybe Mary Wollstonecraft as a synthesis of these entire set of philosophical thought processes. So Paine is accepting what Burke is saying, that yes, indeed, revolution is often agitated, revolution is often violent, but he he is insistent that if I have to prevent tyranny, if I have to prevent despotism, then I shall have to welcome a revolution. So, somewhere or the other, Paine is viewing Burke to be very overly concerned with the preservation of established traditions. And he says that there seems to be an absolute blindness or an absolute block to looking for a need to reform. I mean, Paine insists that though Edmund Burke has been talking about the necessity to improve. However, while talking about the necessity to improve, nowhere is he suggestive of the fact that improvement is required because the traditions have become, very coercive. And so there is a need to question the existing traditions. And then Paine also adds a very important thing. He says when Burke has been insistent on hereditary rights, on preservation of custom, and he speaks about the value of monarchy, the value of clergy being, the authority who is going to preserve the stability of the society. He says, well, how can a dead person decide the kind of governance in the contemporary society? And so he says that the traditional leaders are no more. And currently, who are ruling under the monarchy or a despotic governance are those who have been nominated by the ancestors who are dead now. So they are absolutely oblivious to the conditions which are existing in the contemporary society. So Paine insists that every generation should have the right to establish its own system of government. Every generation should elect their own leaders. And from where should we elect leaders? It's not about nomination, it's about election. So he's constantly insisting on a republican form of government. And when he's insisting on republican form of governance, he's actually very, very unhappy with the government in England, because the government in England is based on succession and inheritance. And he says that it's being welcomed in England only because, and this is his opinion, only because the people in England or English people are unenlightened. So the philosophy of enlightenment has actually not seeped through them, because the only form of government that can actually bring about the natural rights and that can transform the society for the better, for progression, is a government which is republican in nature. So he feels that families have actually no right to establish dominance in society. You just have a control of the entire society in the hands of a couple of family called the aristocratic families, or the nobility altogether. He says that the nation has to be governed by the people of that particular nation, and not by certain sanctioned family who happen to be hereditary leaders. So you cannot have such a conservative thought process, because it will be unfair to the majority. Because government's sole responsibility and duty is basically to protect the rights of the people, and basically to uphold the idea of social contract, okay, which says that you ensure stability, you ensure certain sacred rights which are sacred to the citizens. And what rights were these? They were primarily four rights according to Thomas Paine. Every citizen had a right to liberty, every citizen had a right to property, every citizen had a right to security, and finally, every citizen had a right to resist against oppression. And these four sacred rights were to be guaranteed to the citizens by whom? By the government. How? Through a social contract. So, this is the sole responsibility of the Republican government, which he felt was any day superior to the monarchy, because republican government would be one where people would be free from a system of any form of social castes, any form of hereditary privileges. And keeping this in mind, he says monarchy is doing nothing, but it is actually counteracting the nature. Monarchy is upside down putting the progression of the human faculties. It is putting the human faculties upside down, the progress of the human faculties upside down. So, very clearly, Paine in his work is saying that representative system is far more compatible with order and with immutable laws of nature as against the monarchy. And so, therefore, it is only the republican form of government which would meet the reason of man in every part. It would be such a comprehensive system that it would ensure that the whole body of people were represented, and then also ensure that all rights and interests were taken into account. So Paine believed that men were born with these four prescribed natural rights, or what you refer to as sacred rights, at the cost of repetition. These sacred rights are right to liberty, property, security, and resistance of oppression. Now, based on his argument, he ends up stating that because of, just a minute, I will just take you a little up so that you can read it for yourself also, the highlighted portions. And now, based on his argument, he states that because the government of France was based on elections and representations of people, it is only because of this reason that the changes that were happening in the French society could be accepted by the citizens. But as I've already shared with you, he was not very comfortable with the idea of what was happening in England, because the government there was, based on succession and inheritance. Uh, Pain is also very different in his thought processes with regard to distribution of wealth, because unlike Burke, who says that yes, there is equality in rights, but surely not equality in things, and Paine says, on the other hand, that it is very essential, if you want to ensure stability, if you want to ensure order, it is very essential that the national income is redistributed, amongst all, especially if you need to help the poor. Because if you are not going to distribute or redistribute the national income, especially amongst the poor, you surely will not be able to bring about an order in the society, because there would be some privileged who would enjoy everything, and there would be yet some who would be deprived. And so Paine had built on this tripartite early ideas of public welfare, redistributive taxation, and even education for the lower classes. He had a lot of, just like other Enlightenment philosophers, he had a lot of, trust, faith in education, and he felt that education would actually liberate people. So, natural rights is not just to be afforded by the aristocracy, or by the aristocrats, or by the upper class exclusively. No, natural rights should be inclusive in nature, they belong to everybody. And so he says we will have to put an end to the monarchy and install a republican form of government in order to best protect the rights of all. So, with this, we end with Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine, and now we actually move on to the sixth philosopher in the background of the first lecture on enlightenment, which I had shared with all of you. And this particular lecture was primarily, weaved out to give you a background to the thought process which was happening or taking place in the minds of the thinkers during that time. And I did come up with an idea of sociological imagination, juggling the fact that, or churning in your minds the fact that out of the six philosophers that we were discussing, Mary Wollstonecraft was the only woman. So, in her twin work, one which was published in 1790 and the other which was published 2 years later in 1792. One being the former being the Vindication of Rights of Men, which is a direct criticism of Edmund Burke, while the latter, which is a vindication of rights of women. In both, she's tried to carry forward the thought processes of Edmund Burke and Thomas Paine. However, she has basically been promoting through her work the unfortunate passivity of women, and she is promoting, she is vehemently anti this passive or this mute picture of women which has been portrayed by traditions and customs, and demands their active involvement. And in fact, interestingly, this is when she begins in her work on Vindication of Rights of Man her arguments against Edmund Burke, because Burke has spoken about or in favor of traditions. And when Burke spoke about, in support of traditions, and I'm kind of quoting from what you can see on your screen towards the left hand side, which has been italicized for all of you. And this is again from her work, Vindication of Rights of Women, and was also there in Vindication of the Rights of Men, in which, and I'm quoting her, she speaks about wretchedness. I mean, it's a very harsh term that she's actually used. The wretchedness that flows from hereditary honors, riches, and monarchy. I repeat, the wretchedness that flows from hereditary honors, riches, and monarchy. And she totally disapproves of these traditions and customs, only because they have been amplifying the passivity, the muteness of the women, as I have just shared. So through her work, basically what she's done is that she has weaved or she has inserted women in the dialogue. And she says, as a part of these traditions, you have something called primogeniture. Towards the right, you would see I've highlighted it in yellow as the first line on your screen, that, she has, there has been this tradition of primogeniture, which is a form of rule of inheritance, wherein the firstborn, usually the male child, had the entitlements to the entire estate of the ancestor. And this was very disturbing for her, because this meant that women were left with either little or actually no property rights. And upholding the traditions meant that she insisted, meant that you are actually supporting all that which is irrational, all that which is oppressive, and all that which calls for ignorance, because she found traditions tantamount to irrationality, to an oppressive attitude, and to an absolute ignorance. Now, she in a response to Burke, says that if you are trying to say that land and property ownership did mean freedom, then you are trying to say that women are not entitled to land and property. By extension, they are not entitled to the liberties. And you are trying to justify this kind of imbalanced approach towards the women, and you are saying that the females deserve to be vindicated. And so she insisted that, well, I totally disagree. And I insist on the fact that natural rights, they appeal to both the genders alike. They appeal to men and women alike. And like Thomas Paine, she's also in favor of Republican form of government. But here she says that she insists on the ideals of Republican womanhood. So she's insisting on the participative role of women. And if we come a little down and look at the last paragraph towards our right in italics, she's contending for rights of women. Now, this will be slightly interesting for us to go a little slow here, because though she is contending for rights of women in this particular paragraph, and she insists that we need to prepare women by education. So again, signifying the importance of education to become, and why do we need to prepare, and for what do we need to prepare women by education? We need to prepare them by education to become the companion of man. Okay, till now it is okay. It's all about companionship of the two genders. Fair enough. Now, a very interesting thing is developing out of this. And if you will see what she is reading through in her mind, which is penned down in this italic, is that for truth must be common to all. And what truth is this? This truth is revealed through education. So must be common to all, must be common to men as well as must be common to women. And if now there's a different revelation coming altogether, and if children are to be educated to understand the true principle of patriotism, their mother must be a patriot. So somewhere, in her lines is annotated a very conservative picture of women liberation. She is stuck to the stereotypical patterned role of women, where motherhood is considered to be a domain where you are a child caretaker. Domesticity is as if running into this gender which is feminine in nature. So somewhere or the other, though she is insisting, no doubt she is insisting on the need to enhance the dignity and self-worth of women, but at the same time, she does concede that only a very small number of exceptional women would be suited to a life of independence. So there are tones, there are arguments in her work titled "Rights of Women," which seem to be highly compelling. Because there are these rare moments when Wollstonecraft is very subtly allowing men and women not to be fundamentally equal, according to Lindsay Cole, in all aspects of life. So she does recognize that men would actually be when they begin their journey of life, they have an end, a goal in view. However, women are more concerned about incidental occurrences. She does put across or point out the fact that physically speaking, physical in terms of physical strength, I'm not talking about in terms of physiology or anatomy, but in terms of physical strength, men and women are distinct. They are very different, and we do find that she has at least initiated the voice to fight for the participation of women, in government making, in ensuring that they also have those sacred rights which are given to men. However, she does doubt the qualification of women, whether all of them are capable or not of enjoying this equal opportunity or equal rights. And maybe somewhere or the other, and actually Lindsay Cole pens it down, and if you will see it here, she says that the passage above, and here that she is Lindsay Cole, and I'm reading that passage first for all of you in italics. It says, "The two sexes mutually corrupt and improve each other. This is believed to be an indisputable truth, extending it to every virtue. Chastity, modesty, public spirit, and all the noble train of virtues on which social virtue and happiness are built should be understood and cultivated by all mankind, or they will be cultivated to little effect." So, this passage, according to Lindsay Cole, is demonstrating that her main idea is that men and women are not equal in everything except in morality. So Wollstonecraft actually did not also totally ignore the fact that there could not be an overnight transition in bringing about equality between males and females, men and women. So maybe possibly she was thinking about a little bit of transformation at one point of time, and then slowly edging into a society which would have men and women as absolute equals to each other. But at least we do give her the due credit of, in this period of enlightenment, voicing the rights of women in particular, and not just, kind of treating women as at the threshold, despite being an important part of the estate called the commoners. Lastly, Mary Wollstonecraft was never approving the idea of charity, because when Thomas Paine talks about equal distribution of everything, and from the national income should be equally distributed, Wollstonecraft denied this kind of a thought process, and she said that basically charity, what does it end up doing? Charity ends up promoting idleness. So she says that if everything and when she says the rich, that's even applicable for the national income. The rich could be an individual in the form of nobility, could be a class in the form of nobility, could be an estate in the form of nobility, or rich could also be the state. So if the rich would give it to the poor, then there would hardly be any incentive for the lower classes to actually exercise their natural and equal rights of opportunity and advancement, because it's very essential for all of us to understand that the social conditioning that we are in as commoners is not what was ordained or predestined by God as was viewed in dark ages. So now enlightenment has put in some kind of an optimism in us, and this optimism has made us very progressive, wherein we have realized that we can actually change our social conditions. So somewhere or the other, Wollstonecraft is advocating for reason, she's advocating for virtue, she's also advocating for knowledge, and she says these three virtues would actually be focusing on individual happiness, and knowledge out of these three is the key to equality within the society. So knowledge is again a self domain, an individual's own domain. So again, talking about progressions from within. So again, talking about the need to erode the false consciousness and build amongst yourself a class consciousness which enables you, which empowers you to bring about a change. And with this, I think we would be coming to the conclusion of Wollstonecraft and her ideology, which precipitated during the period of Enlightenment. And so, if Lindsay Cole's article is kept, or analysis is kept in mind, then in the paragraph towards your right, which is there on the screen, she's tried to give a summary of the three, and she says that Burke seems to be fairly moderate. However, this thought process of giving traditions and giving the monarchical customary rights and advantage makes him very conservative philosopher, makes him a very conservative thinker. And also, she says this is so much unlike Wollstonecraft and Paine, who are much more libertarian in their thought processes and speak about desire for equality, the need for natural rights of all. And amongst all three of them, Wollstonecraft goes to the other extreme, wherein she emphasizes that when we talk about all, there should be a specific space for women in particular. So, with these two video lectures titled Enlightenment Part 1 and Enlightenment Part 2, we have actually covered up the intellectual traditions or the intellectual virtues or the intellectual thoughts which have actually been hitting the entire Europe. and these are manifestations of the chaos created by French Revolution as well as Industrial Revolution, along with, of course, American Revolution. So the changes that were brought about in the Western society. And this period is primarily from 1600s to 1800s. And over a period of time, you have the French philosophers in particular, like Auguste Comte, who are compelled to think of a science which can actually come out with solutions for the chaos in, of course, the background of these kind of liberating democratic thought process. And we'll continue ourselves in our discussions related to sociology in forthcoming lectures. Stay involved and happy learning to all of you. Thank you.